Hey guys, welcome back to the channel Custom Carving and Epoxy UK. So in this video I wanted to experiment with blooms again, but I wanted to try and do something different with the centre and do some chameleon powder petals. So if that's what you're interested in, this is the video for you. One thing I will say, stay tuned to the end, because this is one of those videos where absolutely everything that could go wrong probably did go wrong. So learn from our mistakes, enjoy the video, and let's get straight to it. So here we are back in the workshop, and the first thing I got was these two jewellery moulds because I wanted the centre to be a little bit different. And I've been playing recently with the bubble technique, and I thought, wouldn't that make a great centre for a bloom? So first part of this is just literally going to be making those centres for the 4 blooms that I'm going to try and make. So just getting everything ready, and I've got this gold pigment powder, this bronze pigment powder, mica powder, sorry. And then I thought I'd mix it with a little bit of this papaya. I love mixing up my micas to make my own individual colours. So we're going to be using this hard UV resin. And this is the size that I'm going for. I thought it'd be about the right size for the centre of a flower. Then realised I had to get them aligned so that I could fit my UV lamp over all 4 at the same time. So just having a play around with the mould, getting it the right way around so that I can actually fit the lamp over hopefully all 4 at the same time. But as you'll see shortly, nothing in this project was straightforward. So just mixing up some bubbles in this bubble mix, and all this is washing up liquid and a bit of water. I keep it in the workshop. It's been in there for about 2 months and it still creates great little bubbles. And all I'm doing is mixing it up, and it creates really, really small bubbles, which is what I wanted for the center of these blooms. So again, just whipping it up to create those bubbles. If you're new to the channel as well, please make sure you like and subscribe. It makes a huge difference. We've just gone over 6,500 subscribers, and I appreciate each and every one of you. This channel is about everything epoxy, UV resin, and a little bit of wood carving thrown in as well. So if that's what you're into, you're in the right place, and it makes such a difference just liking and subscribing. So you can see bubbles are now mixed up, and I'm just going to fill up the cabochon moulds probably about halfway at this point. Just making sure my UV lamp's plugged in and working before I do that. And at this point, I should have started to realise by how bloody cold it is, oh pardon my French, in the UK at the moment, as to where these problems are going to start happening. But I actually didn't, because at this point I was working with the UV resin. So doesn't really impact UV resin as much as it does epoxy resin. But just to give you guys a bit of an example, in the UK the temperatures have dropped from around about 19-20 degrees all the way down to anywhere between 12 and 13 degrees, pretty much overnight. So it's a lot colder. And I tend to do most of my epoxy work outside in a little outbuilding with no heater, which I didn't realise would have such a big impact as you'll see later on in this experiment. But at this point, everything was going well. So just filling up the cabochons, about 3/4 of the way full. As you can see, about 3/4 of the way full, and I'm filling all 4 of these circular shapes. Sorry about my hands getting in the way at this point. I think I forgot I was filming for a minute. But the camera work will get better, I promise. And again, let us know whilst you're here if there's anything that you want to see done as an experiment. Put it in comments and we will give it a try. So as you can see, they're about 3/4 of the way full. A couple of bubbles in there. I can see probably about 8 bubbles in all of those. And strangely, even though we're trying to get the bubble effect in these to create that effect, I don't want unwanted bubbles in there. So it sounds a little bit crazy, and it is probably pointless thinking about it logically, because we're going to be putting bubbles in there anyway. So what does a few extra actually matter? And if you've ever wondered what happens to your dotting tool if you don't wipe your resin off, this is what happens. You get a solid clump of resin on the end of it. But it still works. So I'm just trying to pull those bigger bubbles up to the surface so I can get them with my long nose lighter. But again, I might try next time I do bubble effect, just not taking these bubbles out, because actually we're trying to put bubbles in anyway. So does it really matter having a few extra bubbles in there? Be interesting to see if those bubbles have a different impact than the bubbles that we actually try and put in. But that's an experiment to come. So that's the bubbles up to the surface, and now I'm just gonna get a long nose lighter and torch them. And at this point, realise that this one had run out. First thing started to go wrong, so I swapped it for another one, and I've actually just got a new one of these from Amazon that I think is going to work a lot better. So I'll show you that in the next video. But pretty happy with that. Most of the bubbles are gone now. And now we're going to add them back in. So just whipping them up again to try and get some fresh bubbles on the top. And the key thing to remember here, when you're doing the bubble technique, you want the bubbles, but you don't want any of the liquid from underneath, because resin and water does not go together very well, whether it's UV or epoxy, it doesn't like water. So just whip them up so you've got a good probably inch on the surface, and then I'm just going to use a stick to actually put the bubbles onto the surface of the resin. As you can see, get a good layer and put it all over the surface. And this can be a bit finicky depending on your gloves as well, because they do like to stick to your gloves, so just bear that in mind. But dead straightforward, cover each of the pieces in the bubbles. And actually this is one of my favourite effects, especially for beginners, you know, because it is so simple, yet it looks so effective. So if you haven't seen it yet, watch our other video that we did specifically on the bubble technique. But I just thought that this would create a cool effect for the centre of the blooms. And there we go. Happy with the amount of bubbles on there. So now it's time to cure it. And with it being UV resin, always remember to cure both sides. At this point, a little bit cold outside, and I was a little bit bored waiting for these to cure, so I just thought I would mix up my colour that I want to brush these with. So first of all, I went with some gold. And don't be afraid, guys, to mix up your own colours. That's one of the beauties of mica powders. You can mix them all together and create your own unique colours. So just putting a little bit in there in the centre. Now going to add some of this bronze. Again, about the same amount. I'm just guesstimating at this point. As you can see, the bronze is slightly darker than the gold. And then to brighten things up again, I thought I'd add a little bit of this papaya that I've got as well, which is an amazing colour. I think it's one of my favourite at the minute. It's a really, really vibrant orange, this papaya. So just going to add some of that just to give it a bit more of an effect with that gold and with that bronze. And it's amazing when it cures, it all just becomes one colour as well, which is amazing to say there's 3 different colours in there. So that's my 3 colours, just mixing that up, and I was quite happy with that. Not too golden, not too bronze, and not too orange. Perfect. But as I say, this is one of the things I love working with resin and mica powders, is just making my own colours that nobody before has ever made in exactly the same composition. So it's truly a unique colour. Now they're cured, just going to wipe off the excess bubbles with a bit of kitchen roll. And just look at that. What an amazing effect already. And now, just to be sure they're completely dry before I brush the mica powder on, I'm just going to give them a quick 30-second blast. All I'm going to do is brush on that colour I've just made, making sure that I cover absolutely every single bubble in there. But I'm really happy with the effect so far. Again, the bubble effects really worked. Love this colour that I've just made. And then all you're going to want to do is fill it with some more UV resin and then cure it. And you could back it with black, but I decided because I'm going to be probably backing the whole coasters in black anyway, there was no point. So at this point, again, it also makes sure that they cure as well. So I just thought I'd fill them to the top with clear UV resin and then cure them. If you're struggling with sticky UV resin, top tip for you, do the final minute in water. All that is clear water in a tub, and now I'm going to demold the pieces straight into the water and cure it for a further minute. And at this point, I was really happy with the way that everything was going, but all that is about to change very soon. Now they're fully cured, just drying them off with a microfiber cloth, and let's see what results we got. But hopefully we've made some really cool handmade centers for those blooms. Again, always use a microfiber cloth if you can, rather than using kitchen roll. It just stops any risk of scratching. But at this point, really happy with these centers, and I thought they did look like the center of a flower. Let me know what you think in comments. Do you like them? Are you going to try this in your next bloom project? But I just thought it's something different. It's something that I've not seen anybody else do in blooms before. I know I've seen those people put little glass beads and stuff like that in there, or even broken glass and stuff like that, but I've not actually seen anybody create out of UV resin using the bubble effect for the center of the blooms, and I think it looks quite natural, and I love the fact that each one looks different and unique as well, the same as a flower would in nature. And this is the last one. But again, look at those bubbles. I love the fact that they're not all the same size, because I think in nature, you know, nothing is ever exactly the same. So just going to give you a bit of a look at these before we move on to the next step. And I say at this point, really happy. I thought these looked stunning, and I thought they'd look great as the centers of those blooms. They'd also look really cool as planets, actually, thinking about it. And create those blooms. First thing I want to do is to make sure that my table was reasonably level, so I got the spirit level back out. Just measuring things again, because as you knock your table and things like that, it can become unlevel. And to my surprise, it was actually quite level. The risk is if your table isn't level, then your blooms will shift, as we found out in an earlier project. But just try and make sure that everything's level before you get started. Then I thought I'd get my chameleon colours ready. And what I wanted to do was mix two in each bloom. So this one is grape and magenta. I just thought it'd be cool to again mix our own chameleon powders. Then I went with olive and blue. Next was galaxy and teal. And then for the last one, I just went with champagne and pink. And I'm going to be using this deep coaster mold from Let's Resin. The plan is to only do 4, so I'm just cleaning out 4 of these coaster molds, making sure that they're spick and span and ready to pour into. And it's really worth taking your time cleaning your molds because it makes such a big difference in your finished piece. And imagine if you've got some amazing crazy effect that you've never had before, and then there's a blob of old resin or something in your coaster mold that you hadn't been bothered to clean out. So make sure you clean out your molds before you pour. Now what I'm going to do now is just spray them with my silicone release spray. Keeps your molds lasting longer and it makes it a lot easier to demold. Just a couple of squirts in each and it makes a big difference to actually demolding the piece and keeping your molds lasting longer. And these are the centres again. The plan was to put those in the centre for when we do the bloom effect. And at this point, again, everything going well. Got my piping bags ready as well. And the plan was here to pipe each colour in as well. So I'm just cutting a little bit off because even though these are the small piping bags, they're still far too big for what I need. So I'm just cutting the tops off to make them more manageable. And again, I just get these from Amazon or eBay, depending on where it's got the best price. But they come in like a 100 pack for about £4. So they're not expensive. And it does make a big difference to the control you've got over your resin. And getting my gloves on, ready to mix up the resin. Always remember when you work with resin, wear a respirator, wear some gloves. And for this, I'm just going to use this Jan Chun epoxy that I've got from Temu. It worked quite well last time. And I'm going to mix up around about 10 ounces. So I want 5 in each cup. And this is the point at which I should have realised my first mistake was the fact that I store my resin outdoors. The temperatures in the UK dropped down to about 14 degrees centigrade, and it was looking even thicker than normal when I was trying to pour it. And this is quite a thick resin anyway, but it was really, really thick as I was pouring it out. And now poured it into a big silicone mixing jug so that I can mix it before putting it into my bubble removal machine from Resiners. If you haven't got one and you want one, I've actually got a discount code which is ccukresin, which gets you 15% off anything on the Resiners site. So they do mixers as well as the bubble removal machine. So far, this bubble removal machine has done really well for me at removing the bubbles. But again, look here, look at how stiff and thick this resin is, and this is because I've left it outside. But I managed to get it all in and just started stirring, and oh my god, the resistance this was giving me just to stir it. Again, I should have realised at this point, gone and got a hot water bath or something to thin the resin out, but being a typical bloke, I suppose, I just persisted anyway and just thought, oh, I'll give it some elbow and keep mixing. But look at how difficult it is, you know, just to try and mix it. Also found these 2 little bits in it, so remove those before they got stuck in. But it seemed as well, every little stir I was making was also adding more bubbles, which I don't normally get when I'm mixing resin. So I think this is the problem. It becomes a lot stiffer when you leave it out in the cold, and it is so difficult to mix. I mean, look at how much I'm struggling here, and I still carry on persisting. And after struggling with it for well over 10 minutes, decided it was mixed enough, so I was going to put this in my bubble removal machine for 9 minutes, and hopefully that would remove the bubbles. But I really wasn't happy at this point because it was still thick and there was all of these bubbles inside it, which I never get when I mix resin. So the only thing I could put it down to was possibly the colder temperature, and resin likes to be at 21 degrees or above. Unfortunately, in the UK, we don't get that very often. So I put it in the bubble removal machine. And I decided, because of the amount of bubbles in there, to just put it in there for 9 minutes. After 9 minutes, took it out. And if anything, there seemed to be more bubbles in it, which again, I've not really experienced before. But look at it. It's like a milky mess. But just decided to give it another quick stir, and look at how thick it still is. I've never known resin be this thick, and again, this should have been a warning sign to me, but I carried on persisting, and carried on just giving it another quick stir. And then I thought, do you know what will help? Another 9 minutes in the bubble machine, the bubble removal machine. But just look at that consistency and those bubbles. It just shows you the difference temperature makes on resin. So again, learn from this mistake, guys. Mix your resin at a warm temperature, or at least store it indoors before you mix it. That's what I'm going to be doing from this point forward. At this point, just put it back in the bubble removal machine for 9 minutes to see if that made a difference. See, it didn't really, but at this point, I finally realised what the problem was. Took its temperature, and it was only at 15 degrees centigrade after all of this time. And look, it was just getting worse and worse. It looked like every time I did it, more bubbles were going into it, and it was becoming more of a milky mess. So decided at this point that I would try and get a hot water bath for it. So just put it in a hot water bath, not boiling water, but warm water. Look, you can see the steam coming off it. That's how you can see how cold it is in the UK. And it started to stir a little better, which was good, but it wasn't fully solving the problem. Now, what it was doing was warming the resin up, because we're up to 21 degrees now. So that is the temperature at which I think resin likes to be mixed at. But I think the problem is the amount I've mixed it already, and it's been in the bubble removal machine already for 3 times now. So what's that? 27 minutes. And it just seems to be a milky, murky mess. At this point, decided there was only one solution. Now it was up to temperature. I would put it back in the bubble removal machine for another 9 minutes. This would make it 40 minutes now. It'll have been in that bubble removal machine. Now I was getting concerned about the working time. Although I was concerned, I'm one of those people that decides always to go through to the end with every project and see what happens. So just getting the tubs ready, and I'm going to mix up the chameleon powders whilst I'm waiting. So just 2 into each pot and giving them a quick stir. And I decided no matter what happens, once this comes out of that bubble removal machine, I'm going to go with it and see what happens. But again, I thought mixing the chameleon powders, it makes them unique. Nobody that I know of will have mixed these chameleon powders in exactly the same way with exactly the same amounts. So again, it creates a brand new colour. And again, just eyeballing it, how much I want of each. And then I'm going to add resin to it, mix it and pipe it in to make those petals. Or at least that's the plan. Now that's done, just going to mix up the white, and I'm just using this ocean white from Temu. I've had some really good results with it in the past. Just make sure when you're using any of these white pigment pastes, you give them a good shape. Otherwise all the pigment might be at the bottom and you won't get the right consistency. I decided I was doing about 40 mil. So I added 5 drops in here, which should give me a nice opaque colour. So that's ready for the resin, and As you can tell, I'm a bit frustrated. I don't know what's going to happen, if it's going to work or not, but I'm persisting anyway. So just putting the resin into the colours first of all, mixing them up and putting them in the piping bags. Again, just completely eyeballing the amount as well. Pouring some of the resin in, mixing it up with the mica powder, and then just putting it in these piping bags, ready to do the patterns on the resin. And I should have probably realised at this point, the amount of time I was taking probably meant that that resin was cooling down an awful lot because of the outside temperature already, even though I'd kept it in that big container. So it should actually be heating up at this point. And if anything, I think it was cooling down. But we carry on. So that's the first one ready. And now I'm going to do exactly the same with the other three, but I'll speed it up so you haven't got to watch it. I had to try and torch off some of those surface bubbles before I pour, took its temperature, and it was showing us 37 degrees Celsius here. So that should be well within the range for the bloom, but I don't know if that's because I just torched the bubbles. So just going to spread this across the 4 moulds reasonably equally, and I'll speed it up. And just look at all those bubbles. I've never had resin like it. So just decided to torch as many as the surface ones off as I could. And then I'm going to persist anyway and go ahead and put the designs in. But let me know in comments if you think this is going to work. I'm absolutely horrified at this point, but I'm continuing anyway. Those bubbles are just everywhere. After playing with them for as long as I did, I decided, look, things aren't going to get any better. So just putting in those centers that we just made earlier in the video, trying to get them as central as possible before we add the blooms. And again, looking at this angle now, that probably wasn't the dead center. So maybe I want to mark the center on the bottom of these molds if I'm going to do this project again. But just pushing them right down to the bottom, so there's a little bit of resin going over the top of them, so that hopefully the blooms will still not be impacted by these centers that we've made. But again, I want them to be completely covered in resin. And although I was a little bit deflated, and I had a huge inkling at this point that this project would not work in any way, shape or form, but I wanted to get it out for you guys and for the beginners out there, just to show you, doesn't matter how long you've done this for, doesn't matter how many experiments you've done, things will go wrong that you don't expect when you work with resin. The key is to persist, see what you come out with at the end, and learn from your mistakes. As good as I'm going to get it. Just decided to put the designs in. So I went in with the chameleon powders first rather than the white, just to see if that'll give me a different effect this time, because I normally start with the white. So again, just going around in a circular motion, starting at the center, because I wasn't too fussed if I got a blob in the center, because of the fact we've got that centerpiece there blocking it. And I'm just going to keep going around in a circular motion until I feel that there's enough circles in there to create the petals. And again, at this point, I should have realized there was something going wrong, because usually when I'm doing the bloom effect, when I add the white at this point, usually pretty quickly I can see some form of effect happening. And at this point, I didn't see anything. So the plan is to do this with all 4 and then to go over it with the white. But again, I'm going to speed it up for you guys. It's a dead straightforward process. Just go around in circles and I'll come back to the shaping. And then the next thing goes wrong. You guessed it, the battery died because of how long I'd taken mixing. I thought there was more than enough battery, but obviously because of the 40 minutes it took in the bubble machine and the extra time it took mixing, the battery died. So but in the end, this is what the designs look like. Again, if you want to see how I create these, just look at one of the previous bloom videos, and I pretty much did exactly the same process. And now it's just a case of leaving them to harden up before I could go putting the black backing on. But again, was not impressed at this point. Just use the extra as well to fill up some of these molds at the side, and then we're going to leave it. It came back about 7 hours later, and it seemed to me as if it was solid enough to put that back coat on. So I'm just going to mix up some more resin, add some black mica powder, and add this backing to them, and then leave them for the full 24 hours. Again, normally this only takes about 4 to 6 hours maximum. So that, again, this should have been a sign that it wasn't curing. And again, for me, it didn't look like they were blooming. So I really thought this was going to be a complete failure at this point, but I wanted to persist anyway for the purposes of the video to finish the project and see what happens. So just mixing up a small bit of resin. Now just going to add a few drops of alcohol ink. I thought that would actually help with some of the bubbles. And then I'm just going to add some standard mica powder to create that fully opaque black pigment colour. And now just going to pour it reasonably evenly across the back of all 4 of them. Now just going to take the surface bubbles off, and then it'll be a case of leaving it for 24 hours and seeing what happens. But let me know what you think is going to happen in comments. And if you haven't already, please like and subscribe to the channel. It'd be great to see us hit that 10,000 subscribers over the next month or so. And the more this channel grows, the more projects we can do, the more experiments that we can do, and the more that we can learn and keep growing on this journey together. So please give me 2 seconds of your time, hit that subscribe button, and it helps no end. Again, put something in comments, whether you've liked it, whether you haven't, whether there's something you would have done differently. I know there's lots I would have done differently in this project, but let me know if you've learned anything as well. So it's always good to know. But now just going to let these cure for 24 hours, and then it'll be time for the demold. Hey guys, welcome back, and it is time for the demold, and I am so glad. This has been one of those projects where absolutely everything that could go wrong, I think, has gone wrong, but we all get it. I think that's the problem when you work with resin. Not everything works out the way you want it to. And just to add to things, I brought these inside to cure with the temperatures dropping here in the UK. And as soon as I brought them in, strange coincidence, but my boiler broke down. So I'm hoping these have cured enough to demold anyway. It's been 24 hours since I put the backing on, so touch wood, they'll be okay. But it's currently only 15 degrees in my house until a plumber comes out to fix the boiler over the next couple of days. So literally everything went wrong, from the point of mixing the resin, I think because it was too cold, because I'd left the resin outside and the temperatures have really dropped here in the UK, to I don't believe the bloom will have worked, and that's because, again, the temperature drop was so significant. I think that will have affected the bloom, but we're going to carry on. We're going to demold, because I'm one of those that always believes that no matter what happens, always continue with the project and demold, and who knows what you might get at the end. But I really want to see what effect the chameleon powders have had in these blooms, and what difference backing it's made as well. So if there's anything promising in this, I will try it again once I've got my boiler fixed, and once I can figure out how to do it indoors safely, working with the epoxy, because I'm hopeful that we can get some really good results. So I'll start off with the simplest, which was one of the bits that we did with the spare resin, which is the little teddy bear keyring. It's one of my favorites to do, actually, with spare resin at the moment. And actually, he's come out really cool. So at least, if nothing else, there's a cool little teddy bear keyring that's come out of it, and 10 ounces of resin wasn't completely wasted. But really like that with the chameleon effects popping through, and with that extra white bloom I had in the back. I think that's come out really well. So I like him. That's a result. I'll do these pendants because I don't think these will have any significantly different looks about them. But again, pretty nice. It's come out really nice with the different chameleon powders on there. Apart from that air bubble, which you can see there. If you get a piece like this that you really like, that's got a little air bubble piece in, the simple solution is just to top coat it with some UV resin, gets rid of that bubble, and you get a perfectly smooth, shiny surface. So that's just another tip for you. But I'm guessing we will have a similar effect, which we have. But I do like the different chameleon powders mixed in there to create some different colours there. I think they're quite nice. And with the white background, strangely, I actually quite like that versus a black background. So, but again, this was just spare resin. And I am going to try some different moulds, you know, because every time I use these with my spare resin, I don't know if you can see, but I get those little air bubbles and they're always in exactly the same space. So I'm thinking it could be something to do with the mould rather than actually having air bubbles in there. I don't know, let me know what you think in comments, but it always seems to be in the same spaces when I use these moulds for spare resin. Again, there, just on the bottom. Let me just get it to zoom in. But yeah, you can see there's those ones there, but they always seem to be exactly in the same pattern. So I might actually see if it's a problem with this mould rather than me getting air bubbles in there and just blame myself. Now these little seahorses as well that I did as little spares, you've always got to be really careful with the tails on these, otherwise they'll snap. And again, it's going to take a little bit of trimming, but again, that came out really nice. And that was just the white bloom, well, the white ocean white pigment on its own. And I have got a plan for these, so I'm up to about 10 of these I think I've made now. And that one didn't quite fully go into the nose. So unfortunately that one's a bit of a waste, but there we go. Let's hope the big ones have turned out okay. And again, just be really careful when you demold the tail, because that's the most fragile part that you don't want to snap on these. And again, I'm not expecting any great effects from these. They're just going to be, hopefully, there we go. Lovely white seahorse. But what you can do on these is once you've done it, you can still brush mica powder on there if you want to give it a different effect, and then top coat it again with UV resin, which is probably what I'm going to end up doing with these, because I love the detail that you get in there, and they're absolutely stunning. So at least I've got something. I'm not very hopeful for these coasters, and you can probably hear it in my voice, but we will see. But I do love these seahorses that I keep making with the spare resin, and I've got a big project in mind with these, so hopefully we'll get around to that, and hopefully I don't have to wait for the weather to warm up. But let's see if we've got any kind of result with these. As I say, I'm not hopeful, but I do believe that you should always demold. I'm loving the thickness compared to sort of previous ones that I've done. As you can see, they're a lot thicker because I've done that backing layer on top as well. Again, they're going to need a bit of sanding around the side to get these little bits of excess off. But did we get any sort of bloom? And if not, at least what did the chameleon look like? And what did that centerpiece look like that we made? Let's have a look. Well, it's not horrible. And I quite like the chameleon effects popping through, and I really like the center actually, so I am going to be doing that again with the bubble effect for the center, but I wouldn't say they're my best blooms. I don't think it has actually bloomed, and that's the biggest problem, and I think it's because of that significant drop in the temperatures. I can't see any blooming in that, but the center really pops. I love that, so I'm going to be doing that again. So that was the purpley one. Which one was this one? Let's have a look. Again, it's not really bloomed. Centre looks great again. Seems to be a bit of blobbing around this one, if you can see. But yeah, you could call it a fail, I think, unfortunately. And it's such a shame, because if you look at those chameleon powders, I think they would have made great blooms, and I think they tried to, but I think it was just the sudden shift in temperature in the UK what's caused these problems. So last two. And again, that one's pretty, but it hasn't bloomed. None of these have actually bloomed. So in that essence, it's a failure. These centers though, I love. I think that was a great idea, if I do say so myself. And I will be doing that in future blooms. What I have found though, is it seems that some of the white has collected around there and almost blobbed a little bit. So just something to be wary of. But yeah, it's such a shame. If these would have bloomed, I think these would have been my best ones yet. But again, it goes to show not everything goes the way you want it to with resin. So these are really thick as well. And I actually quite like that. And this is the last one. So again, it hasn't bloomed. And the only thing I can put it down to is two things. One, the resin, when I mixed it, if you remember, it didn't seem to mix properly because of the ambient temperature, I think, and I didn't heat it up properly. But interestingly, there's no major little tiny bubbles in there, which I was expecting. And I think too, the fact that the temperature difference was so sudden, I think it's affected the bloom overall, and that's why we haven't got a bloom effect. So, bit of a disappointment there, but do you know what? We will continue. We will try that again in the future, I'm sure. And I'm going to try it with a different resin from Less Resin, and see what we get. I don't think it was the resin's fault, in all honesty. I think it was just the fact that the temperatures had dropped so suddenly in the UK, and I hadn't accounted for that and heated the resin up before mixing. But there we go, guys. Hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please like and subscribe. And I suppose the biggest success out of this project is those centers. I think they look really cool. So I will be doing those again in another bloom project, which will hopefully go the right way. So again, like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you on the next one.